I want to go right to Jeff Zeleny at the White House. Jeff, again, there are a lot of things that we are going to get to in our discussion here and our, not just our analysis, but again, our fact check. But I do want to start effectively where this meeting started about an hour ago, which is where Elon Musk was asked to present what he was doing. The idea that the richest man in the world was standing up, holding court in the cabinet room, dressed in his dark MAGA outfit. And his allegation that what they are doing is, he says, not to purge people, or it was not, in his words, a performance review. He claimed it was a pulse check.
Dana, it was extraordinary. Elon Musk did not have a seat at the table. That was reserved for confirmed cabinet secretaries and those who are awaiting confirmation, as well as a handful of senior staff. But he was center stage. There's no doubt about it. And that fact is not unusual. We have seen senior advisors to many presidents in a cabinet meeting, but never have I heard one be asked to speak and be given the floor like this. The cabinet of this administration was essentially the backdrop for another wide-ranging press conference we've seen the president do. But on Elon Musk, once again, this is the second time we've heard him talk extensively about his plans. But of course, since we saw him in the Oval Office a couple weeks ago, so much has changed. Largely that email that he sent out over the weekend. And that, of course, has caused some of the first rifts between some departments, some agency heads, and the administration, and certainly the federal workforce. But the president asked him to defend that and clearly made the very obvious point that he's on the same page with Elon Musk, that he does believe, he called it a pulse check. He said that 1 million people answered this response, this email, which means more than 1 million did not answer it. And he said they're looking for fraud in the system. But also, reporters asked the president and asked cabinet secretaries if there was any dissent on this topic. This is what the president said about that.
Elon, let the cabinet speak just for a second. Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, we'll throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy?
So that laughter there belied the obvious point that cabinet secretaries, of course, work for the president. So there is no one going to be voicing dissent, at least in that room. It's unclear how long this cabinet meeting will actually last, if it is a question and answer session with reporters the entire time, or if the president's actually going to hear advice from members of his cabinet. Certainly in nearly an hour, it was about 4 minutes short of an hour before we dipped out, there was no room for dissent. The vice president spoke at the very end there, but the president went on to say that the 1 million people who did not respond to those emails may be on the bubble. And we do know that mass layoffs are coming. As we speak, agencies are reviewing plans. But one other separate piece of news, the president, at the very beginning, he said that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be coming here to the White House on Friday. But again, making no security guarantees from the U.S., Dana.
Yeah, he said that's going to be up to Europe to secure Ukraine's, to give Ukraine security, but also did say, as part of this land deal that they're talking about, that U.S. personnel would be there, made this sort of suggestion that perhaps there would be some fortification, if you will, just with business people. But when it comes to actual security, that would be up to Europe. Okay, thank you so much, Jeff. Now let's get to our Daniel Dale. Daniel, you were listening closely. There's so many things I want to ask you about. Can we just start with one of the things that we heard at the end there, because this was just completely factually inaccurate, saying point blank, and I'm pulling it up here, that CBS completely took her answers, Kamala Harris's answers, in the 60 Minutes interview that Donald Trump is suing over, and changed them. There were questions, and there was some controversy around it, but the idea that they just completely changed her answers, we now see the transcript. It's available thanks to the FCC. It's not true.
Yeah, that's a good fact check, Dana. There was just so much in this cabinet meeting. So let me run through some of the big ones. We heard this claim again from the president. He's been saying it over and over in the past week that the U.S. has provided Ukraine with $350 billion worth of aid, and that this is about 3 times what Europe collectively has provided. That is not true. The $350 billion number is not true, nor is the idea that the U.S. has provided way more than Europe. So according to a think tank in Germany that closely tracks this aid, it is Europe that has collectively provided more aid to Ukraine than the U.S. has. In terms of aid committed, it's about double, about $260 billion for Europe to about $125 billion for the U.S. In terms of aid allocated, it's narrower, but Europe still leads. The president also repeated this claim he's been saying over and over, that the U.S. ranks 40th out of 40 in some education rankings. I specifically asked the White House what those rankings were. They were not able to point to any of them. It appears not to exist. In fact, the U.S. Is above average in reading and science, and below average, though far from last, in math rankings, even of wealthy countries. He said the U.S. is the only country with mail-in voting. It simply isn't. He said the U.S. took in hundreds of billions of dollars from China in the tariffs he imposed in the first term. In fact, Americans paid those tariffs. Americans make those tariff payments, and it's not true that Trump was the first president to impose tariffs on China. He said that we lose 300,000 people to fentanyl deaths every year. In fact, it's about 60,000 deaths per year. Still a tragedy, of course, horrible, but nowhere close to what he's saying. He said the European Union does not take American farm products. In fact, it is the 4th biggest market for U.S. agricultural exports of $13 billion per year. He offered another alternate history of the European Union's formation, saying it was formed to take advantage of the U.S. In fact, it was formed with U.S. support, so not even close to correct. And so I don't even know where to go from here. He said there was no inflation when he left office. It was low, but it existed, about 1.4%. He said a lot of the U.S. fentanyl comes from Canada. In fact, 0.2%, about 43 pounds worth, came from Canada, so just a tiny number. And he repeated this claim we heard a lot during his presidency, saying that President Obama merely provided Ukraine with sheets. He used to say pillows in sheets rather than actual military aid. In fact, the Obama administration provided things like counter-mortar radars, armored Humvees, tactical drones, so it was not simply pillows and sheets. And I'll give you one more. He said that, the million people who didn't respond to this email, this 5 things that you did last week email from Elon Musk team, may not exist. I guess it's possible the U.S. government is paying some people who don't exist, but I think it's important to note that we had numerous agency heads, department heads telling their employees not to respond. So the simpler explanation is that people were instructed not to do this rather than them being, fictional, non-existent human beings.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask you about. That is definitely something that when all is said and done, we're going to want the receipts on. Suggestions that the people who have not responded maybe don't exist, as you said. There was one other doozy, which was the allegation that there were Social Security checks going to people who are 150 years old. Those people got older during the cabinet meeting today. Apparently, they're 200 years old. So there is that. Daniel, thank you so much for that.
Brian, I want to talk to you about the made-for-TV moment of all of this. Obviously, that is Donald Trump's MO. He knows how to orchestrate a moment that can be broadcast well, and he wants to make it watchable. This is typically a cabinet meeting like this. They go in, they do what's called a spray. You kind of just take some video. Maybe they shout our colleagues shout a couple questions, and that's that. This was different.
Yes, very much so. This was broadcast live, for one thing. Normally these are taped and then shown later, but I think the Trump White House knows they're going to get more attention when these events are live, and they're longer as well. This is in line with Trump knowing that he doesn't just have to be president, he has to perform the presidency and have the appearance of action, the appearance of doing something at all times. It's also striking to me how he's trying to rewrite the dictionary again. He did this with the word hoax, for example, years ago, trying to redefine the word hoax to mean a true story that he doesn't like. Well, the new word that's being targeted is the word fraud. When they talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, he's trying to redefine fraud as spending he doesn't like, right? Spending that he and Musk don't agree with or don't approve of. And that's the kind of spending they're targeting. It's not fraud in the criminal definition of the term, but it's spending they don't like. And it's interesting how both Trump and Musk keep going back to those kinds of words. I was also reminded by the famous movie line, I see dead people. It seems like Musk and Trump see dead people. They believe there are formerly alive federal employees collecting paychecks even though they're not alive anymore. And you would think there would be better ways to figure that out rather than send an email to everyone and hope they reply. But this is one of those things where Trump and Musk are doing what they call common sense, even if it's actually nonsense when you think about it. That common sense approach does appeal to a lot of people out there.